human ability to speak euphemistically, and human capacity for humor. The novelist Vladimir Nabokov once said that literature was born when the Neanderthal boy cried, "Wolf, wolf," and everybody, the Neanderthal man, came running out of his cave and found that there was no wolf. If there were a wolf, it wouldn't be literature. That is what Vladimir Nabokov thought. This inventiveness, human inventiveness, human imaginative capacity is responsible for literature. That is what the opinion of Vladimir Nabokov is. We say that literature is different from lies. Lies are malicious. They're meant to deceive people, whereas imaginative literature is for entertainment and enchantment. And some philosophers also thought, for example, Aristotle, some philosophers also thought that literature is meant for Horace, for example. Literature, they thought that literature is also meant for, imaginative literature is also meant for instruction. We are going to explore these concepts. For example, Philip Sidney says, the poet, he nothing affirms and therefore never lieth. This statement of Philip Sidney is a good example of mimeticism, which we are going to talk about in the course of this talk. What is this mimeticism? We'll see. So I want to ask a few questions in the course of this, and I'll try to tentatively answer these questions in the course of this talk. What kind of activity or discourse is philosophy? What kind of figure is a philosopher? What kind of activity is poetry or imaginative literature insofar as it is storytelling, whether in narrative or in an active mode? What kind of figure is a poet? These four questions are asked with the idea in mind that the philosopher figure and the philosophical activity from the very beginning are distinguished from the poet figure and the poetic activity. From the, as I said when I began, that my book deals with the distinction between the philosopher figure and the philosopher and the poet figure in the work of Plato and Aristotle mainly. So the entire talk is going to be from the, as far as evidence is concerned, as far as frameworks are concerned, as far as models are concerned, from the point of view of Plato and Aristotle. I'm not going to talk about the romantic view of literature or Marxist theory of literature, all the other theories of literature that we have, but I'd like to talk only about the opinions of Plato and Aristotle. Whether we contradict them, whether we refute them, whether we refuse them, whether we reject them, that is a completely different matter. What are the opinions of Plato and Aristotle? How did they distinguish the philosopher figure? How did they distinguish philosophical activity from poetic activity and from the poetic figure are the concerns of my talk. But before that, I want to say that when Plato was doing philosophy, the word philosopher was only 100 years old, 100 to 150 years old. In the 3rd century BC, a Greek doxographer named Diogenes Laertius wrote a book called The Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers. In the book, Diogenes Laertius tells us that the word philosopher was, the term philosopher was coined by Pythagoras, who lived some 100 years before Socrates and 140 years, roughly 140 years before Plato. So when Plato was doing his philosophy, when Plato was doing philosophy, when Plato was philosophizing, or Socrates was philosophizing, his teacher Socrates was philosophizing, the word philosopher, the term philosopher, the designation philosopher was only 100 to 140 years old. Before the term philosopher was coined, the word, the designation, the term that was used to talk about people with knowledge or people with understanding was sophos. And the word sophos was used to mark sages, mystics, and most importantly, poets too. There was no distinction between sages and mystics and poets. Anybody who was who offered profound insights into the nature of the world or the nature of human life had been called sophos. The second word that is of interest is sophistes, from whom Socrates and Plato distinguished themselves. Sophistes, we know Prodicus and Protagoras, and against whom Socrates did his philosophy. These were orators. They claimed to teach everything under the sun. They claimed to teach oratory, politics, and eloquence, wisdom, most importantly, ethics. So two words are extremely important. One is sophos, which included poets too, and sophistes, which also included orators and politicians and ethicists and sometimes poets. But in the works of Plato, we see the emergence of self-conscious philosopher. Not only is this self-conscious philosopher was distinguishing himself from sophistes and sophoi, the sages, the mystics, and the poets, and the contemporary orators and teachers of political and moral subjects. Not only is the self-conscious philosopher distinguishing himself from them, but the self-conscious philosopher is also outlining the characteristics of the philosophical activity itself. The dialogues of Plato and the treatises of Aristotle are strewn with observations as to what the characteristics of this self-conscious philosopher are, and there are a plethora of there's a tremendous amount of number of passages across the dialogues of Plato and across the treatises of Aristotle as to what philosophical activity actually means and what philosophical activity actually involves. My talk is about the observations and the opinions and the thought of Plato and Aristotle as to what philosophical activity is according to them, number one. Number two, how poetic activity and poetic discourse, the discourse of imaginative literature, and how the poetic figure is different from the philosophical activity and from the philosophical figure, according to Plato and Aristotle. What I'm going to do is that in the following slides, I'm going to show some passages, only a very few of them. There are hundreds of passages which I'm trying to collect for the book. I'm going to show you a very few passages, and I'm going to show you vocabulary. There are two things that we have to do. The first thing is that we have to collect passages, instances of passages from the dialogues of Plato and treatises of Aristotle, number one. Number two, we also have to cull the vocabulary that Plato and Aristotle use to describe the notion of knowledge, inquiry, understanding, expertise, domain-specific knowledge, and procedure, method, and that kind of things. So first thing is citing passages, collecting passages, and the second thing is collecting the vocabulary, which I would call knowledge vocabulary and inquiry vocabulary. The next slides are going to explore these two areas. According to Plato and according to Aristotle, both of them, they totally agree on this particular subject. Philosophical contexts are contexts of inquiry. A philosopher is basically an inquirer, an investigator, a researcher. And both of them, they use two words for the activity of inquiry. The words are zetesis and skepsis. Both of them, they are used interchangeably. Zetesis means inquiry. Skepsis also means inquiry. It can also be translated as investigation and research. A philosopher is basically a researcher. A philosopher is basically an inquirer. I want to draw your attention to the contemporary debates about the difference between scientific figure and scientific inquiry, and the literary figure and the literary inquiry. There are contemporary debates about that. We need to understand that the word science is a Latinate word. It comes from Latin, and there is no way the ancient Greek philosopher knew the word science. And there is an artificial, because English language is predominantly a Latinate language in its vocabulary, and owing to the explosion of Latin as lingua franca in the medieval Europe, most of the scientific vocabulary or vocabulary related to inquiry and vocabulary related to knowledge, these are Latinate. But when we are talking about Greek philosophers, we have to lift that veil of Latinate vocabulary. So when I am talking about, or when Greek philosophers, they were talking about philosophical inquiry or philosophical activity, is almost it is in very, very important ways. It is the same as when we talk about scientific inquiry, although they're philosophical inquiries into nature or human mind or human brain and medicine. These were not as successful as contemporary enterprises, domain-specific enterprises, sciences. We should not be deceived by the differences created by just words. The ancient Greek philosopher was a scientist, basically a scientist, in the sense that the philosopher was after knowledge. Whatever the domain was and whatever the inquiry was, he was after knowledge. That is what it means. So what is the character of philosophy? First point, that Plato and Aristotle, both of them, they agree, and most ancient philosophers, even Hellenistic philosophers after the death of Aristotle, they, even in the 16th century and the 17th century. By the way, I want to draw your attention to a fact that the word scientist was coined in the 19th century by William Hoover. Before the word was coined, the scientist, all scientists, they were called philosophers, natural philosophers, moral philosophers, metaphysical philosophers. For example, Isaac Newton was called a natural philosopher. The great scientific work written by Isaac Newton, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, is Philosophiae Naturalis. It's mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Physics was called natural philosophy. So when I say philosophical inquiry, what I want you to kindly pay attention to the idea that it is almost like scientific inquiry. So what is the character of philosophy? Both Aristotle and Plato, they agree that philosophical contexts are contexts of inquiry. A philosopher, when he is doing philosophy, I'm using the pronoun he because almost all the ancient philosophers that we know about were male philosophers. So a philosopher, when he was philosophizing, what he was actually doing was that he was inquiring, investigating, researching. And the word that the words that are universally and uniformly found in Plato and Aristotle are zetesis and skepsis. Point number one we need to understand is that inquiry is about domain-specific objects of inquiry. These objects of inquiry are called zetimata. For example, if the philosopher is inquiring into, let us say, the nature of mind, like, for example, Plato wrote a dialogue called Phaedo, which in ancient times, which in the antiquity was known as On the Soul. Aristotle also wrote Peripsuchi, which means on the soul, on the, these are psychological works. The objects of inquiry are psychological. If the domain is physics, the objects of inquiry are physical. If the domain is mathematics, the objects of inquiry are medical. If the domain is ethics, for example, the objects of inquiry would be ethical, like bravery. So, for example, Socrates would go around asking questions like what is virtue, what is bravery, what is justice, that kind of questions. So, philosophical contexts are contexts of inquiry, number one, investigation or research. Number two, this inquiry is about domain-specific objects because we are living in a universe which has multiple objects in it. It's a plural universe. And these objects of inquiry have different natures. For example, chemical objects are different from, let us say, biological objects or mathematical objects or ethical objects of inquiry. We have domains, psychology, ethics, economics, politics, poetics, for example. A philosopher who is interested in or inquiring into poetry would inquire into poetical objects. Therefore, we have something called philosophy of literature. The ziti matter, the objects of inquiry would be poems. Number three, inquiry is goal-directed. It is always goal-directed. Inquiry is not conducted willy-nilly by the ancient philosopher. It is always goal-directed, and the goal is knowledge, understanding. The understanding of or the knowledge of the object of inquiry. For example, if the ancient philosopher is like Aristotle, take Aristotle's treatise on the movement of animals, movement in animals, let us say. He wants to understand how gait or movement, walking, let us say, happens in animals. That is the object of inquiry. And the goal is a complete knowledge or understanding of the gate of inquiry. Whether it is successful or not, that is a completely different issue, because we all know that success in philosophical or scientific inquiry is dependent on the availability of tools like microscopes and telescopes, that kind of tools, and it takes time. But the inquiry itself is a genuine inquiry. Inquiry is goal-directed, and the goal is knowledge or understanding. The Greek word for knowledge or understanding is interchangeably, for example, the great linguist John Lyons, who studied Plato's vocabulary, Plato's knowledge vocabulary, comes to the conclusion that these words, episteme, techne, and sophia, all of them, they are interchangeably used in Plato and also in Aristotle. Whatever the case, inquiry is goal-directed, and the goal is knowledge and understanding. Inquiry is also norm-governed and procedural. The inquiry was not conducted unsystematically. It was conducted according to certain norms. There was always regimentation in inquiry. For example, if you see the Socratic philosophical activity, you will see dialectic. Platonic philosophical activity, you will see dialectic. Aristotelian philosophical activity, you see what we call apodeixis or demonstration, logic. If you see, for example, the Aristotelian philosophical inquiry in biology, the generation and the decay of animals, Aristotle's works on meteorology, for example, Aristotle's works on zoology, for example, a lot of empirical evidence was collected. So the word that was used for norm-governed, the alertness to this norm-governedness was methodos by Aristotle. And the knowledge that is the goal of inquiry should be true knowledge or factful knowledge or real knowledge. It should not be suspicious. The aim, the standard is always truth, and the word that was used in the ancient times, in ancient Greek, was aletheia. So these are the main ingredients of philosophical activity. Zetes is a philosophical inquiry. Philosophical activity is inquiry, it is investigative, it is research activity. This research activity has specific objects of inquiry, which are zeti matter. This inquiry is goal-directed. That is, the goal is knowledge. The goal is always understanding of the objects of inquiry. And then this goal is norm-governed, logical, mathematical, or empirical. Method is method is two-dimensional. It has two sides to it. It is either empirical. All method is either empirical or logico-mathematical in Aristotle and Plato. And the knowledge that they aimed at, the standard, the criterion that they imposed on themselves as far as knowledge or understanding of objects of inquiry is concerned, it was truth. We need instances, we need passages, for example. In the Republic, Plato says that the Republic is about, the Republic is a huge encyclopedia of thought. The Republic is about a lot of things. It is about excellence. It is about, it has educational theory in it. It has political theory in it. It has literary theory in it. It has theory of justice in it. It has constitutional theory in it. It has legal theory in it. So, for example, Plato says, perito dikaion ztc, which is the investigation about justice. That is what he says. The passage says, the philosopher, the Plato's protagonist, Socrates, when he asks the question, what is justice? As a product of this inquiry, we have the dialogue Republic. So we ask, what is the subject matter of Republic? What is the object of inquiry of Republic? The object of inquiry, the zitima, is justice. And as it is, I mean, as you can see it here, ZTC is the word that is used. It is inquiry. In the same book, Republic, he says, our search for the fine and the good. He says, what is the good and what is the fine? What is the excellent? These are the objects of inquiry. What is the right thing to do, for example? What is the good? So it is, again, the word you can say, I have highlighted the word, it is ZTC, the word is used. Aristotle, for example, in Nicomachean Ethics, he says, not all investigation appears to be deliberation, as for example, mathematics, but all deliberation is investigation. Whatever the philosophical implications of this passage are, I want to draw your attention to these, the fourth word in the passage, finitae hemen ztisis, he says. It is inquiry. Again, in Metaphysics, Aristotle says, it has been said, then what is the nature of the knowledge being sought? And what is the object toward which our inquiry and our entire method should aim? This is a wonderful passage in which you can see all the notions, inquiry, the goal of inquiry, the object of inquiry, and the procedure of inquiry, the systematic procedure of inquiry, all of them mentioned in this particular passage. Again, not just they were not just interested in the character of philosophy or philosophical activity. They were also extremely interested in and particularly concerned with the character of the philosopher. These two were extremely important for Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, their teacher, because of the emergence of the self-conscious philosopher figure. For the first time in the history of human thought, in the 4th century BC and in the early and late 3rd century BC, in the works of Plato and Aristotle, there emerged the self-conscious philosopher. So what is the character of the philosopher according to Plato? Philosopher, Plato says the philosopher is not the lover of the body, he is not philosomatos, he is not the lover of power, he is not philarchos, he is not the lover of, I'm sorry, there's a spelling error. He is not the lover of fame. He is not philotimos. He is not the lover of riches. He is not philochrimatos. He is not a lover of pleasure. Philidonos. He is not the lover of pleasure. These passages are from Phaedo, and these are Plato's definitions of philosopher. These are from Phaedo, and these are from Republic. What is a philosopher? Philosopher is a lover of knowledge, and he is the lover of eternal truths. That is the character of the philosopher. So from these passages and from the vocabulary that are used by Plato and Aristotle, we can gather or collect or come to a generalization about the commitments that Plato and Aristotle had as to the activity, philosophical activity, and the figure of the philosopher. The commitments are, I have given them ism suffixes. So the first commitment is zetetism, which means the commitment to inquiry. The second one is epistemism, which is commitment to understanding or knowledge. The third one is the commitment to aletheism, a commitment to truth or fact or reality. This is what is called aletheism. The fourth one is alertness to procedure, regimentation, which is called Methodism. The self-conscious philosopher figure in Plato and Aristotle obsessed over, the number of passages is huge. Each and every single, if you read Aristotle, if you take the complete works of Aristotle by Jonathan Barnes, for example, and then just browse through the first paragraphs of each and every treatise written by Aristotle, you will see that the philosopher is obsessing over these concepts: inquiry, the goal of inquiry, the object of inquiry, and the alertness to procedure can be seen. So the ancient philosopher had these commitments: zetetism, commitment to inquiry, commitment to understanding or knowledge, commitment to truth, fact, and reality, and alertness to procedure and regimentation. So I have tried to go through all the works of Plato, the dialogues of Plato and the treatises of Aristotle, and tried to collect vocabulary related to knowledge and inquiry. And classicists and philosophers have already done it. For example, the great philosopher, 20th century philosopher Miles Burnyeat, he already worked on Plato's knowledge vocabulary. He did not work on Plato's inquiry vocabulary, but he worked on Plato's knowledge vocabulary, like Sophia, episteme, gnosis, and techne, these words. And the philosopher James G. Lennox, in a book called Aristotle on Inquiry, he worked on Aristotelian inquiry vocabulary, like zetesis, methodos, skepsis, these words. If you collate their results, if you colligate their results, still there is a lot of gap. What we need to discover, what we need to find out is the similarities, the great similarities between how much of the borrowal going on in the Aristotelian thought and Aristotelian philosophical activity and Aristotelian notions about the philosopher figure. It is extremely interesting to see, exciting to see that the differences are very, very, very minimal. So, for example, I've taken some words, and I tried to collect their word families. These are lexical items, and this is a paradigm. This is the entire paradigm of the lexical item. For example, take mimistai group. The Greek word mimistai is the verb imitate, and it has all its declensions, the aoristic, futuristic, all declensions. And then the noun is mimesis, which is imitation or imitating. Mimema, which is imitant. For example, this is an extremely important notion which will immediately clear away our doubts about plays being, or epic poems being, or novels being imitations of the model, whatever it is. We will talk about that later. A play for Aristotle is mimema. It is the imitant. For example, when we go to watch a movie, for Aristotle and Plato, the movie is the mimema. It is the mimema of what? So the important question is, if the play is the mimema, if the movie is the mimema, if the individual novel is the mimema, if the short story is the mimema, if the epic poem is the mimema, the question that we need to ask and answer is, what is the play mimema of? In Plato, this world that we live is already a mimema. It is an imperfect copy of what he calls ideas in the mind of God. That is what is called Plato's idealism. The original and the source is in the mind of God, so to say. And these are ideas. And this world, the individual chairs and the individual tables and the individual trees and the particular rivers and oceans, all of them, these are already imperfect copies. They are imperfect mimimata already. And Plato says that the human products, like paintings and poems, they are further removed from they are further imperfect because they imitate an imperfect copy of an idea. This world that we live in is already a mimima. It is almost like Indian philosophy. This world is Maya. It is a mimima. And then the human products like poems and songs and instrumental music and dance, all of them, they are further removed from the reality, aletheia, which is ideal, which comes from the Greek word eidos, which is in the mind of God. But on the other hand, for Plato, for Aristotle, there are no such ideas. The world that we live in is the real world, and the human products are the mimima of the real world. So we need to understand that the source, the play is the mimima, or the painting is the mimima. For Plato, this play, this painting, or this piece of instrumental music is a further imperfect copy, mimima, of the imperfect mimima of the world in which we live, of the original is in the mind of God, which is an idea. But for Aristotle, the play is a mimima of the original, I mean, the original source is in the world. That is what Aristotle means. And the mimetes is the imitator, the poet and the painter is the imitator. These, I mean, the most interesting thing about these words is that they came into being in the 5th century BC. They were used very, 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 very rarely. They were non-technical words and they were non-theoretical words. If you read the 5th century works, for example, pre-Platonic works, for example, Sophocles and Aeschylus and Thucydides, and if you read these works, for example, these words are almost absent. They came into existence. For example, Homer knows none of these words. In the Iliad, in the Odyssey, none of these words exists. So as far as the textual evidence goes, all these words, they came into being in the 5th century BC, and they were used in non-technical, non-theoretical sense. When I say non-technical and non-theoretical sense, what I mean is that these words were not used to construct a theory of poetry or to construct a theory of dance or construct a theory of, they were not technical or theoretical words. But suddenly in the 4th century BC, they became technical terms in the work of Plato. The question is, why is it that these words, which were non-technical and non-theoretical, they were picked up by Plato, and suddenly in the works of Plato, in the Republic, in the Ion, for example, or in the Phaedo, as we'll quote some passages from Phaedo. Why is it that these words, which were ordinary, non-technical, non-theoretical, everyday words, but which were, as far as the textual evidence goes, which were very rare, they were taken up by Plato and they were converted into theoretical and technical terms? Inquiry vocabulary, for example. These words are everywhere. Now, this particular group, Mimastai group, is important because this group is used by Plato to talk about this world being an imitation, and also to talk about the world created by fine arts being imitative. And by Aristotle, just the second, the world created by the fine arts. That is the reason this particular group is extremely important. The following group is extremely important because these groups, they were used by both Plato and Aristotle to talk about the philosophical activity, to distinguish the philosophical figure from the poetic figure. For example, the most interesting thing that we need to find out, whether they have done it right or not, that is a different issue altogether. The most interesting thing that we discover when we read Aristotle's and Plato's works is this. The inquiry vocabulary and And the knowledge vocabulary used by Plato and Aristotle are never used to talk about fine arts, what we call fine arts, poetry, instrumental music. For example, in the Poetics, Aristotle says that epopoeia, epic poetry, tragic poetry, comedy, dithyrambic poetry, instrumental music, most music that is set to aulitos, which is pipes, panpipes, and kitharistiki, which is lyre, and even dance and painting, all of them are different kinds of mimesis, he says. Are types of mimesis, are species of mimesis, he says. The fine arts in general, the inquiry vocabulary and the knowledge vocabulary, Aristotle and Plato used. These words, these terms, they were never used when they talked about fine arts. And the mimetic vocabulary, the words belonging to the Mimesthai group, they were never used when they talked about the philosophical activity. In Plato, on the other hand, we see the vocabulary that he uses for fine arts. We see that it is also used for in his epistemological theories which deal with this world. Except one exception, in Aristotle, because Aristotle differs from Plato in only a very few aspects, and one of them is that Aristotle also believed that fine arts are capable of offering us knowledge. Only in that particular context, Aristotle, only twice he uses the knowledge vocabulary when he talks with literary works. For example, this inquiry vocabulary, Zetein group, this has zetein, which is a verb form, zetis is noun form, zetima, again a noun form, the subject matter or object of inquiry, zetetikos, inquisitive, investigator, adjective form, and adverb form. Zetitis, inquirer, investigator, and researcher. Zetitis is the inquirer, investigator, and researcher. Mimetis is the poet or the painter. Skeptomai group, this is a synonym of, this is another word which is used by Plato and Aristotle to talk about inquiry. These are the only two words. Skeptomai group, for example, to consider, survey, to look around, look back, contemplate, and spy. This is a verb form. Skeptestai is another verb form, inquire and investigate. Skepsis, investigation and inquiry, which is a noun form. Schema, problem, this is the object of inquiry. Skeptikos, which is an adjective and an adverbial form given to inquiry. Scopain, B grade, another morphological form of the same verb, to look at these words. And aletheis group, for example, aletheis, which is true, aletheia, truth, to speak the truth, who always speaks the truth, the person, truth-telling or truthfulness. Epistastai, which is knowledge vocabulary, epistemai, be assured, know-how, epistastai, to know, to understand, verb form, adjective form, adverb form, all of them, noun, personal noun. These vocabularies, words, and these passages, and many more, they are used by Plato and Aristotle for a particular purpose. They are used to, yes, madam, there are only a few slides, 2 or 3 slides, and then the philosopher distinguished from the poet. There is an interesting, I'll tell you a last bit of, one last piece of interesting story. Socrates was there in the prison around a month before his execution, before his death. He was there in the prison around a month. And the last days, Socrates, who vindicated philosophy against poets and orators and politicians, he occupied himself with versifying Aesop's fables. And he occupied himself with writing a poem in honor of, a hymn in honor of the god Apollo. One of the interlocutors in Phaedo, in the dialogue Phaedo, asks him as to why he has done it. For example, Phaedo says, Socrates, you who have never written poetry in your entire life, you who have spoken vociferously in vindication of philosophers against poets and orators and politicians, why is it that you wrote poetry in the last days of your life? That is what he asks. Rather than giving a direct answer, Socrates gives, in his typical characteristic ironic style, the dialogue swerves into the concept of the immortality of soul, and then again he turns out to define another characteristic of philosopher. He says that the philosopher is brave in the face of death, and a philosopher is not afraid to die. A philosopher is not a lover of the body, and he goes on to define the characteristics of philosophers. It is an interesting passage. He says, even though he versifies Aesop's fables, and even though he writes a hymn in honor of Apollo, he says a poet, if he is to be a poet, must compose fables, not arguments, he says. Even here, he is distinguishing the philosopher. The philosopher is a composer of arguments, whereas a poet is a composer of fables. That is what Socrates is saying. No teller of fables myself, he says. The Mythologikos, he defines himself as a philosopher, and then he says, I am not a teller of fables. That's what he says. And Aristotle agrees with, in the definition of poet, in contradistinction to the philosopher, Aristotle in the Poetics, he agrees, actually. The poet should be considered a maker of plots, not verses, since he is a poet quam maker of mimesis, and the object of his mimesis are actions. That's what he says. In another passage, Aristotle says, poetry is at once more like philosophy, and more worthwhile than history. Aristotle is not trying to say that poetry is philosophy, but poetry is quasi-philosophy. That is what he's trying to say here. I think Madam Dr. Betsy Paul is trying to call me, warn me. Please, Madam, you can tell me here.
Okay. Now we need to have some sort of a discussion too.
Sure,
so
madam.
If you don't mind.
Please. It's okay, ma'am. Yes.
Please conclude.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry that I interrupted.
No problem.
Please conclude.
Philosophy of literature is actually boring. You see, the literature departments, they don't study philosophy of literature at all.
Not at all. It's not like that. It's very interesting.
Yes. Yes, madam, I'm open to questions, ma'am. Many questions about this. With my limited knowledge, I will try to answer the questions. By the way, I want to say one thing, madam. This discussion actually does not hinge on the idea of the value of literature. You see, what is the value of literature? You see, we have our own ideas about the value of literature. And ancient philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, they have their own views about the value of literature. Aristotle thought that literature is capable of understanding, which is there in the next slide. Plato was completely of a different opinion. Yeah. So it's just an expository and exegetical talk. I don't attempt to construct a theory of my own.
Okay. Is it over, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Am I perfectly audible? Because I'm using my cell phone.
Yes.
I'm audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
No problem, sir.
Congratulations, Dr. Siddhartha, for offering this brilliant discourse. It is essentially philosophical discourse, I would like to call it. You are a diligent researcher in this domain, as is evident from your presentation, sir. As a student of literature, of course, I have limited access to your area, but of course, in my own way, I would make some humble comments.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. First of all, you see, you remember Coleridge? Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. He wrote once that No man was ever a great poet without being at the same time a profound philosopher.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah. As he writes in Biography Literaria. Yeah?
So, yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'd like to say something about that, sir.
Yeah.
The point is,
And in his own way, sir, he gives his own philosophy. I mean, his own philosophical understanding of the world.
Yes.
In the rhyme of the ancient mariner, you might remember that he prayeth well who loveth well, both man and bird and beast.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, the world, when it's passing through a kind of, disaster, crisis, as you know, the environmental crisis,
Yes.
the words of Coleridge would give us a perfect sort, because it's a kind of learned kind of discourse that he offers at the
Sure.
end of the poem.
Yes.
And sir, as you were alluding the question of fable, without fable one cannot, write, a successful poem. Okay.
Yes.
So, we often talk about the use of allegory
Yes.
in poetry. Allegory is essential.
Yes, you're right.
Fable is essential. Okay.
Yes.
And let me just, make some humble observations on your presentation. For example, philosopher is always after knowledge. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you refer to, of course, Socrates, the question of what is justice.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I at once remembered Francis Bacon's essay of truth.
Of truth.
And the essay began with that statement, what is truth?
What is truth? Just suggesting Pilate and would not say for an answer.
Yeah. So what is truth? And of course, truth is, multifaceted, because we don't know what truth is.
Yes.
Okay. And it may be theological, ethical, what it is exactly. So throughout a life, you have to grapple with what is truth really.
Mm-hmm.
And so you also talked about that this inquiry is norm governed. Okay, this is goal oriented first of all, absolutely. And this is norm governed. I want to just pose a humble query unto you at this juncture, that what is exactly this norm? I mean, does it in any way entail the question of ethics here?
No, not that kind of normativity, sir.
Yeah. So what is your take on it?
No. See, it's not my take, sir. Aristotle actually talks about it in prior analytics.
But what is the norm? I want to know from your end, sir.
Say, for example, the principle of the excluded middle.
Acha.
The logician, for example, says that a proposition is either true or false. It cannot be both true and false at the same time. This is a norm. Okay. That is what norm governedness means there.
Okay. I understand. And sir, where you were talking about the character of a philosopher, one point, of course, I mean, there were several points that you raised. One is that he is not a lover of pleasure. Yes. He's a lover of knowledge. He's a lover of eternal truths.
That is Socrates' opinion.
Yeah. So I remember exactly at that point a celebrated poem by John Milton, Lycidas, where he is giving this idea, scorn, delight, and live laborious days.
Yes.
So if you don't live laborious days, you cannot, of course, treat the path of inquiry. It's not possible at all. This is my own understanding as a student of literature.
No. We see. First of all, my talk is not a personal philosophical take on the ideas of Aristotle and Plato. It is an exegetical. It is an exegetical talk. It's a historical. It's a particular period in history. Plato and Aristotle, both of them, they thought of these concepts in this way. This is what this is what the subject of my talk was, sir. And the second thing that I wanted to say was that Plato's and Aristotle's views about the philosopher figure are completely different from the romantic ideas of the philosopher figure. They're completely different. They're totally different. It says that there is around 1200, 1300 years of cogitation, thought going on. So these two notions of a philosopher are completely different. As I said in the very beginning, we see in the works of Plato and in the works of Aristotle a serious attempt to distinguish the philosopher figure from the poet figure. That is what. But before Plato and Aristotle, the poet, like say for example, Shelley famously says, "You see, poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Legislators of the world." And when Shelley was saying this, he was actually talking about poets before the philosopher figure emerged. A self-conscious philosopher figure emerged in the 4th century BC. He was talking about Homer and Hesiod, and in the beginning he says poets were the legislators. That is what he says. And the next thing I want to say is that Socrates and Plato, both of them, they have a very, very narrow view of philosophy than we have. For them, the word philosophy is almost equal to what the word science for us means. Like physics and logic and mathematics and medicine and chemistry and biology and zoology. And what they did was they extended their deductive nomological method of science that we follow today to the disciplines of ethics also. For example, you see this concerted effort in the Socratic enterprise to arrive at a true definition of justice. What is justice, he asks. He wants to, of course, we all know that all Platonic dialogues are failures. They're aphoretic. Socrates fails to come to a conclusion as to what justice is. So their definition of philosophy is completely different from our definition of philosophy. And we tend to include mysticism. We tend to include otherworldly thought. We tend to include theological thought. We tend to include poetic thought. We tend to include, let us say, for example, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Plato, when in the Republic book, the 3rd book, he says to his interlocutor, "Shall we talk about the biggest criminals, intellectual criminals?" he says. "And who are they?" he says. The interlocutor, "Homer and Hesiod," he says. Homer and Hesiod, you see, Plato says Homer and Hesiod. And why? Because they tell you all kinds of lies about God. Plato would have a logically deduced set of characteristics or set of traits for God. Not any willy-nilly stories told by, like, for example, Zeus killed his father, Kronos, and castrated him and swallowed his penis. This is the God, the picture of God that Homer gives you. But Plato asks, do you think Zeus is that kind of a God? So Plato comes to the conclusion that logically and philosophically speaking, God must be good. So a philosopher's God is different from a poet's God. And this is the reason in the Romantic period, Keats, he says, the poet is a light-winged creature, and philosophy clips his wings, cuts his wings, and that's what Keats says. So
absolutely. So thank you. And now I open the floor for the questions, comments, observations, queries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the observations. If anybody wants to ask a question, please ask me.
Ma'am, is there any question?
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Yes.
Yeah, hi, sir. First of all, thank you so much for this very enlightening talk and taking us to another discourse on the philosophical analysis. My name is Meera, and I'm a scholar with St. Aloysius College, Thrissur.
Hello.
And I have a question, to what extent does this critique of poetry reflect on this broader anxiety?
Broader? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Broader? Hello?
I think network
There is
issues.
an issue with Mira's network.
I couldn't hear the question, please. Yes, Mira.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Shall I repeat, sir?
Yes, please.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, my question was like, to what extent does this critique of poetry reflect on the broader anxiety about this persuasive power of language, especially in the Athenian democratic culture?
Yeah. See, I can tell you two things. The first thing is that, I think it is pertinent. Thank you very much for asking me this question. First of all, oratory must be distinguished from poetry. You see, oratory must be distinguished from poetry because oratory is not about constructing plots or telling fables. You see, the eloquence is completely different from telling stories. That's the first thing. The second thing is, there is an interesting passage in the Republic where the interlocutors, when Plato rails against Homer and Hesiod, one of the interlocutors, who is a fan of Homer, he says, "Oh, that is not what Homer says. He is not talking about Zeus, and he is not talking about." By the way, Professor Joyjit Ghosh introduced a term, allegory. The word allegory is an interesting word. The word allegory was completely unknown to Plato. It came into existence in the 2nd century AD. Allegory, allegorein, which means to speak otherwise. Plato actually deals with the question of allegory, but the word is hyponoia, hidden meaning. The word is hyponoia. In the Republic, the word is there, hyponoia. If you read the Republic in Greek, what the interlocutor says is this: Homer's poems are hyponoiac, he says. They have a hidden meaning. They have a meaning, you see, they're actually interpretable in terms of natural forces and that kind of things. And then Plato raises two questions. The first question is, how do you know which meaning is the right meaning? How do you know which interpretation is the right interpretation? Number one. Number two, how will you convince children who believe in fairy tales, he says. So Plato says, those who believe in Homer's tales about gods are intellectual children, he says. Now here, we don't need to support Socrates, but what Socrates is trying to tell us, that philosophy is hardcore atheism. For Plato and Socrates, it is hardcore atheism. You have to speak only the truth. If you read the entire corpus of Plato, every single time Socrates asks a question, Plato's protagonist, Socrates asks a question, for example, puts a question to one of his interlocutors. He says, please don't give me any answer. Speak the truth, he says. Give me only the correct answer. Whatever you think is the truth, you tell me that, he says. This is what is called atheism. Yes, the ancient Greeks, they were extremely, fearful of, they were scared of the persuasive powers of eloquence, oratory, number one. Number two, that is what the sophists, the sophistes, before the emergence of the philosopher, self-conscious philosopher figure, the sophistes is the philosopher, you see, in the activities of the sophists like Protagoras and Prodicus and that kind of sophists. They claim that they would teach oratory, they would teach, twisting the wrong argument right, making the wrong argument right, which is a charge which is leveled against Socrates also. So who think that some of them who think that Socrates is also a sophist. So they were extremely scared of oratory, number one. Number two, they were scared of philosophers also because of their hardcore atheism, because most of the times it so happens that we prefer shayari to science. That's human tendency, see.
Thank you.
Sir, can I add one more question?
Please.
Yeah. So just based on your talk, I'm just drawing on a few points and getting into the contemporary lines. Like, my question is this: can this contemporary philosophy still draw meaningful boundaries between its methods and those of literature, or are these boundaries increasingly porous?
No, philosophy. See, if you really observe, see, Mira, let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What is the difference between as far as the discursive framework is concerned? I want you to, perhaps, I suppose you study a bit of linguistics. Yeah. As far as the textual framework is concerned, as far as the discursive framework is concerned, and as far as the thought process is concerned, let us say, noetic framework is concerned, what is the difference between a philosopher and a novelist? A novelist weaves a tale. On the other hand, a philosopher asks a question and attacks a question through a particular procedure. And the procedure would be argumentation. Now, let me give you a few strategies. I mean, this is actually an interesting question for Aristotle. Aristotle thinks about definition, horos, definition. A philosopher needs a definition. A philosopher needs classification. A philosopher needs comparison and contrast. A philosopher needs explanation. Why is something, say, for example, what is bravery and why do you think this is bravery? Bravery is the object of inquiry, and the philosopher argumentatively attacking the concept of bravery wants to collect evidence from the real world about the instances of bravery, as to the instances of bravery, and asks a question, explanatory question, why do you think is it bravery? For example, if the domain is ethics, say, for example, if the domain is cell biology, you want to know what a cell is, give me a definition of the cell, which is actually, in a sense, a description of the nature of the cell. You see, why does a virus get into the body and then attaches itself to the protein cover of a cell and then destroys it and gets in, corrupts the mitochondria, for example, and then creates a syndrome of diseases all across the body, human body. This is what the scientist's interest is. As far as the discursive framework is concerned, this is what Aristotle and Plato meant. A philosopher attacks a domain-specific question. His goal is knowledge about the domain-specific question, and the procedural activity is logico-mathematical and empirical, and a philosopher requires definitions, classifications, comparisons, contrasts, explanations, that kind of things. But you don't have any of these things in a novel. A novelist does not define anything. A novelist, that is the reason they use the word, the concept of mimesis, you see. Mimesis is not just making copies, you see, for Aristotle and Plato. We need to revisit Plato and Aristotle and read them more exhaustively. Mimesis is a theoretical concept used by Plato and Aristotle to distinguish the discursive frameworks and the story worlds of epic poems and plays, which are not the... A philosopher may use metaphor. A philosopher may use a story, but the philosopher's use of a story and metaphor and allegory are for the purpose of attacking and solving a domain-specific question. A poet does not engage in all these things, and that is the reason Plato and Aristotle used a specific word for that. It is zetesis, inquiry. We should not use the word inquiry in the same sense as we use it in the English language today. For them, it had a specific meaning. For us, we can say literature is inquiry into human nature. Aristotle would, Plato would take the person who says this to task. You see, that's the point. For them, zetesis is a specific meaning. It had a specific meaning. I don't think, Mira, I don't think the question is porous. No. Philosophers, if you ask philosophers as to what they do, they will tell you, we don't do what novelists do. We don't do what playwrights do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
So we have some questions in the chat box. Shall I read it out?
Please.
Dr. Sudipta Chakraborty has thanked you for your session, and she has a question on the Plato's definition of a philosopher is criticized as being a reductionist or eliminative discourse that separates the soul from the body, and feminist philosophers and new materialists highly questioned Plato's notion of a philosopher. Would you focus on your observation on that point?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to answer this question. in terms of what you want to achieve. Say, for example, she said feminist philosopher. As far as my discussion is concerned, I am only interested in the methodology of philosophy. Feminist philosophers are not interested in the methodology of philosophy. They want to achieve certain goals. They have certain questions and they want to achieve certain goals. There is a general figure of a philosopher whose philosophical activity across the board, it is the same. Say, for example, a feminist philosopher, if the feminist philosopher is in pursuit of truth, a philosopher, qua philosopher, still has to use logic, still has to use empirical methods, still has to collect evidence. That is the point. Whatever the question may be, the concerns may be different. So I don't understand when the questioner said Plato's definition of a philosopher is criticized as being reductionist. I don't know reductionist in what way, because one should not see the philosopher Gilbert Ryle talks about category fit. Category fit is one kind of question should not be confused with another kind of question. A methodological question should not be concerned with the question about the objects of inquiry. A feminist philosopher has a different set of objects of inquiry, but still the same methodology. The methodology would be logical and empirical. You see, arguments are the same, argument structure is the same, syllogistic structure is the same, demonstration method is the same, proof method is the same, evidence collection is the same, data collection is the same, all of them are the same. One is a methodological question, the other one is a question about, you see, objects of inquiry. What are your interests? What are your objects? What do you want to achieve? That kind of things. I want to give another answer. There's an extremely interesting passage in Nicomachean Ethics. I would advise the questioner to read it. Aristotle says it is wrong to expect merely rhetorical proofs from a mathematician, and it is also wrong to demand mathematical precision from a rhetorician. That is what Aristotle says. So I don't think this is a mathematical. Feminist philosophers, as far as they call themselves philosophers, in the sense that they follow the philosophical methodology of logic and empirical methods and all, they are philosophers. But on the other hand, their goals may be different. Same with Marxists, same with materialists, any other. Methodological definitions of philosophy are different from, definitions of philosophy which center, say, for example, theology. A hardcore atheistic philosopher would completely eliminate theological thinking being called philosophy. You see, for example, Bernard Williams makes a distinction between apologetics and philosophy. He says that theology must be consigned to the domain of apologetics. It's not philosophy at all, he says, because there is no concern for truth in it. So, yeah. But at the same time, theologians also use, methodologically they are philosophers. They use logic. Say, for example, the famous ontological argument. It is a very sound argument in terms of logic, but it fails in terms of empiricism because there is no evidence. That is the point. So I don't think, I don't see this question as a, yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. There's a question by Sandeep E.S. Considering the philosophical distinction between inquiry and imitation as discussed by Plato and Aristotle, which approach do you think holds more relevance in today's socio-cultural context, particularly in the fields of imaginative literature and public understanding?
Yes.
Is the model of the inquiring philosopher more effective in generating critical thought today? Or
Absolutely.
does the initiative model of the poet still serve a more impactful role in engaging the public?
So this is an interesting question. This is a really very good question to which Socrates himself has an answer. There is a popular misconception that Plato banished all the poets from his Callipolis, his ideal state. If you read the brilliant article written by Miles Burnyeat, Did Plato Banish Poets? That is the title of the article. you will see that, Plato was not an enemy of mimesis, number one. Imitation is inescapable. Number two, Plato did not banish all the poets at all. As long as poetry is didactic, as long as the mimesis is is the mimesis of good things, he's okay with it. So Plato's concerns were sensationalist, violent, pornographic mimesis, and telling lies about gods. Making the citizens of the Callipolis weak. And so, Sandeep, the question is, you need to make a distinction between sensationalist. From the point of view of Socrates, of course, it's not my opinion. We need to be able to make a distinction between sensationalist, pornographic, violent, cruel literature. On the other hand, because Plato is a moralist, which we all do not want to be, we don't want to be moralists, especially in the company of friends. But Plato was a moralist, you see. That is the reason he said, watch out for literature. Don't sell yourself to poetry. That's what, famously Aquinas said, vinum demonum, it's the wine of the devils, he said. So, because they were thinking about the ability of literature to entice emotions, make strong men weak. So they were worried about moral issues, number one. Number two, the first part of the question is much more interesting. Say, socio-cultural context. What do you think, which approach do you think holds more relevance in today's socio-cultural context? If your objects of inquiry are, say for example, you're studying poetry and you are, I. Richards has an excellent, I. Richards, in The Meaning of Meaning, he says, what is it, literary critics, they started talking like poets, he says. Literary criticism is a philosophical activity. They should not imitate the style and thought processes of poets, he says. So, if you are studying literature from a philosophical point of view, in the sense that, if you are a literary historian or philosopher of literature, the inevitable thing that you're doing is you're doing philosophy. You're not doing poetry. The problem is not with literary studies. Aristotle was a student of literature. The literary studies is a branch of philosophy. Literature is not. That is the point. Poetry is not, but studying poetry is a branch of philosophy. That is the point that you need to understand. Either one can, in one's approach to poetry, either one can start talking like the poet, or one can, detach oneself from poetry and do philosophy. That's what. Philosophy of poetry. That is the point. And poetics is an excellent work of philosophy of literature. For example, Aristotle tells us that, what is a plot? He says, "Siste siston pragmaton." It is a composition of events, he says. It's a philosophical observation, about poetry, which enriches our knowledge of plots. That's the point. And as far as questions like, gender, as far as the questions like environment, as far as the questions like economy, this kind of things are concerned, it's always best to study them from the point of view of economics and biology and ecology. After all, literary representations and then thinking about things about the world from the point of view of literature would be at best commentatorial. Yeah. Not alethic or epistemic, but commentatorial. That's the point.
Thank you, sir. Professor Ashok Sen Gupta had made a comment.
Yes.
Dr. Siddhartha, that was a very absorbing talk. I'm glad you addressed the old tension between philosophy and literature in terms of the rhetoric of philosophy. Mm-hmm. There has been an attempt to engage with this issue in post-structuralism. Derrida has several important essays on Plato's and other classical philosophical writings. Yeah. However, I would beg to differ with the argument about the philosophical paucity of literature. Mm-hmm. There is a formal difference, surely, but literature is not divorced from inquiry.
I have no beef with the comment. Yeah. He is right. He's right, because I was simply talking about what Aristotle and Plato thought about it. I told you, my talk was an exegetical talk. I say I'm not taking any sides. That's not my purpose. He's absolutely right, and he is better read than I am. Yes, he's absolutely right. I'm not taking any sides. But the question remains, is Derrida speaking the truth? Would be a question of interest to Socrates. That's the point. Which does not vitiate Derrida's, this comment does not vitiate the Platonic and the Aristotelian activity. And Socrates would again ask and inquire whether Derrida's opinions are true opinions or not, which would again be philosophic inquiry. Number one. Number two, literature is a very vague word. The word literature can be used. It can be used reportively. It can be used etymologically, neutrally, which is everything in print. Number two, it can be used honorifically, all great books in the world. Number three, it can be used in a stipulative manner, only imaginative literature, stories. So, for example, are the things that are of interest to Plato and Aristotle, because they excluded lyric poetry from their discussions. Aristotle has nothing to say about lyric poetry. For example, encomia, panegyrics, and elegies, and iambic poetry, hymns, proemion, that kind of poetry. And Aristotle has nothing to say about them because they are plotless. Something that is of extreme interest to Aristotle is plottedness. For Aristotle, as the definition, Aristotle's definition is, so far as it goes, a poet is a poet not by making verses. You can write philosophy in verse, and you can call it poetry, but it would still be poetry, philosophy. But on the other hand, for Aristotle, poetry is storytelling. You see, we need to make that distinction. Number two, there is philosophical discussion in mimetic texts. After all, they are mimetic texts. If there is philosophical discussion in the real world, there should be philosophical discussion in the poetic texts, story worlds also, because they are mimetic. So this comment does not challenge anything, actually. It is an Aristotelian observation. Aristotle gives it the name of dianoia. You see, Aristotle says that it is dianoia, but Aristotle is still making the distinction between a philosopher figure and a poet figure on the basis of the discursive differences. Poetry is mimetic and philosophy is zetetic. I would want to avoid the word inquiry, because the word inquiry in the English language is so broad that it causes confusions. What we mean by inquiry is not what Plato and Aristotle meant by inquiry. That is the point. For them, philosophy is inquiry. If from the 20th century point of view, if you broaden the meaning of the word inquiry and then you say literature also inquires into, explores, fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah, it's true. Say, for example, the powerful prognosticative literature, like science fiction, let us say. Yeah. We learn a lot of things from science fiction, and we learn a lot of things from philosophical fiction, like Brothers Karamazov or The Idiot or Camus' works. And yes. Yeah, he's right.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I hope we don't have any further questions. With the permission of Dr. Siddhartha and Dr. Joyjit, we are about to conclude the session.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, ma'am.
Oh, thank you, madam. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm really honored. Professor Joyjit Ghosh, I'm really, really honored. Such an eminent scholar.
Thank you. It's an honor unto me as well.
No, sir, I'm just, see, in the introduction, they were talking about emerging scholars or beginning scholars. I'm a beginning scholar.
No, sir. So, looking forward to your book, sir. Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Sure.
Share the title of your book. Okay.
Sure.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you.
Yeah. Bye.
So for the participants, there is a feedback link posted in the chat box. Please submit it to generate your e-certificates. Now I request Ms. Karthika, research scholar at St. Aloysius, to deliver the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Nima. Good evening to everyone present here. It's indeed a great privilege and pleasure to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing team.
Madam, can I make one last? I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Really very sorry.
Okay, sir.
See, there is a very good book, madam, by Peter Lamarck and Steinhogem Olsen. It is called Philosophy and Literature, Truth and Fiction, is the subtitle of the book. I will send it to you. There's a no-truth theory of literature in which there is an excellent discussion about the many meanings of the word true. We should not be deceived by the so many ways in which we use the word truth, actually. A philosopher's use of the word truth is different from, see, the word true can be used simply in the sense of sincerity. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. It is sincere minds. That is what Shakespeare's sonnet. The word true is, sincerity is not the philosopher's meaning of the word truth. There is an excellent discussion in that book. Thank you. I'm really sorry.
Okay, sir. So it is indeed a great pleasure and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing team of St. Aloysius College of this particular program called Chrysalis Lecture Series. First and foremost, let me commemorate the dignified personalities who left an indelible mark in the history of Aloysius College with their sincere and selfless contributions for the institution's academic journey. Each edition of Chrysalis stands as a tribute to the enduring legacy of the department's revered teachers, Reverend Father Anthony Kutikat, CMI, Dr. Danya Menon, and Professor Paul Davis. Their profound impact continues to inspire the spirit of inquiry and academic excellence that Chrysalis embodies. Next, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to respected principal, Dr. Dias Edie, for his constant encouragement, visionary leadership, and unwavering support in nurturing academic initiatives like Chrysalis Lecture Series. I extend my hearty gratitude and appreciation to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Siddhartha Pratapa, for your erudition and compelling presentation.
I thought this was a family affair.
Okay, it was definitely.
I thought this was a family affair, and now you're saying all these things.
Okay, then you have that clarity of thoughts, and also that depth of scholarship is very evident from your lecture.
Let's talk about other things now.
Thank you, sir. Okay, I'd also like to sincerely thank our esteemed moderator, Dr. Joyjit Ghosh, for your insightful guidance, which helped.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Then I would also like to thank Professor Ashok Sen Gupta for being present here and supporting the session with his valuable question. And I also like to thank Professor Chako Jospi, who is the former principal of Aloysius College, who made this session a very enriching one with his valuable presence. A special note of thanks to Dr. Betsy Paul, C, Director of Research Center in English and coordinator of this Chrysalis program, for her wholehearted dedication and academic excellence. Your pivotal role in coordinating this event and many more events like this Chrysalis have been instrumental to the institution's growth and success.
Thank you very much, madam. And I'm really sorry if I was too loud.
Thank you, ma'am, for your support and cooperation.
And Mahesh is also here, madam.
Okay. Thank you for your presence. Then I'd also like to express our deep appreciation to Lipson KB, IQAC coordinator of the college, for his support, and to all our esteemed participants and scholars and academicians of various institutions. Thank you so much for being here. Your valuable participation and also thoughtful interactions have enriched the session. And last but not the least, sincere thanks to the entire organizing team for their behind the screen efforts and also the technical support, then seamless execution of today's session. As we conclude, may the spirit of inquiry and learning continue to guide us in all our future endeavors. So thank you once again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Karthika ma'am. So once again, on behalf of St. Aloysius College and Chrysalis team, I thank everyone for your valuable time and cooperation in this 49th session of Chrysalis. So see you in the next session, which will be held on 14th of August, and that will be our 50th session. And proudly invite you for the next session. So see you soon. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. Madam, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nima. And okay, once more, though some of those have left, once more, let me to invite all those who are present here for our 50th session. It will be in hybrid mode and it will be in during daytime because we are celebrating our 50th session. And thanks once more, Dr. Joyjit, Dr. Joyjit and Dr. Siddhartha. Both of you have.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, madam. Very nice. It was really good. Thank you, madam.
Yeah, I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it. I was scared.
Okay. Bye.
So,
See you, madam. Bye-bye, madam.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Bye, sir.
Bye.